Welcome to today's Vivid webinar, Introducing the Next Generation of ALM. We're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's webinar is brought to you by HP Enterprise. Just a brief introduction of myself. I'm your host today, Bob Cruz. I'm actually very proud to be the Florida chapter Vivid leader and have been for many years. I'm also president of Checkpoint Technologies. We are a business partner, training partner, and software support partner for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters, Matthew Braley-Berger. And Matt has 18 years of experience in software architecture, project management, development, and quality. Matt currently works within HP Enterprise as a senior product marketing manager for the application lifecycle and quality solutions. And he attended the University of Ottawa with a degree in software engineering and currently resides in Chicago. And we also have VanDan Nayak, Senior Product Manager with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, who has over 15 years of experience in the application lifecycle management and quality solutions. In the past 5 years, Nayak has been focused on modernizing the ALM platform and delivering next generation of application lifecycle management software. And VanDan also holds an MBA from Levy School of Business from Santa Clara University. So gentlemen, thank you very much for presenting today. I know we are all really looking forward to it. Before I turn it over to the presentation, just a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to share with the audience. This live session is being recorded. It is intended for all Vivid members. The recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivid website, visible for all members. And additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you. We will send you the link via email once they are posted to the Vivid website. And if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to submit those questions. I know that VanDan and Matt would like nothing more than to have just a very informative session. Please type and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. And there on this next slide, you're going to see a picture of the webinar control panel. So it should appear in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to submit a question. Just make sure the questions pane is expanded, type in your question, and click on send. That's it. So without any other delay, let's get started, and I'm going to pass it over to Matt. Matt, take it away.
Cool. Thank you very much. And again, huge thank you to everybody on the call. I really appreciate it. I know we're different time zones all around the world here, and for those of you seeing it in the recording as well. Pretty exciting topic. I'm actually in Yehud this week, actually working with our R&D team, and actually working with some new product that we'll be talking about here. And in particular, what we'll be talking about first is really introducing our perspective on some of the challenges that we see in the marketplace itself. And of course, if you're in the market, you have your own challenges, you see things, but we get the excellent perspective of being able to see this from so many different customers and so many different geographies. And I think the goal of all of this is really just to introduce to you the beta that we've got opening up here in a couple of days, to invite you to take a look at it, give you some feedback basically on that. And I'll go ahead and just get started in some of this stuff here. Now, because we are talking about beta technology, as you can at any large organization, we've got to make sure that all of our customers and anybody listening is understanding that some of this stuff could be potentially perceived and communicated as a roadmap item. Some of these things can change. We may be talking at some points things that are coming up in futures, but again, this stuff could be subject to change. Just making sure that's well communicated. And some of this stuff as well, we've deemed to be also potentially confidential. And we'll go ahead and move into some of the actual content directly here. So most of you on the line, I'm assuming, are probably existing users of the Quality Center product or our HP ALM product. And our real perspective at the moment is obviously the market's changed. The world's been changing a lot. It's always changing, but the pace of things is changing an awful lot more these days, in large part driven by the business. The mobile revolution, the move to digitize everything else, it's really driving an evolution of application delivery. And we've moved to actually expand the platform that we've got for ALM to introduce new ways for customers to be able to deal with some of the rapid release constraints, some of the new ways that teams are using different tools and still need to be able to communicate and collaborate amongst each other. And this is really what we're seeing. The evolution of application delivery is here. We've got new digital technologies. There's new models of business out there. There's new challenges. There are organizations certainly who are moving towards the concept of Agile. There are a lot of customers we talk to who are either in mid-stride towards a DevOps future, or maybe looking towards a DevOps future, but there's also a large number of customers who are very, very comfortable with the way they support their business today. And in some cases, this duality, I will say, in some organizations where maybe the same company has both of those types of cadences of release and business constraints. And so some of the systems maybe don't need something like a continuous delivery model, but some of the systems, and they may even rely on each other, do. And so there's this whole new world of application delivery out there, and there's certain ways and certain challenges that have to be addressed in a potentially different way. And so ultimately, again, some of the examples we've got here, the concepts of iterative, performance management, Agile and Scrum, and variants of these types of things begin to become more pervasive in some organizations. And this is the interesting challenge again. I think it's exciting, quite frankly, when we look at the market itself, to watch how organizations are doing this. And just an aside, and this is maybe interesting because I'm working with our R&D team this week here, we moved ourselves and done a lot of these transitions to some of these more modern ways of doing delivery and faster cadence and things like that. And it's really quite impressive to see how our team has been able to adapt and introduce new ways of delivering functionality, and certainly faster ways of delivering functionality. So it's pretty exciting. I think it's a very, very exciting time to be doing this type of stuff. Now, Gartner coined this. I won't claim to necessarily be the originator of this, but this idea of bimodal IT. And we see this probably as the most prevalent thing, certainly within our medium to enterprise-sized customers. The fact that we've got part of the organization, we'll call it the core IT group, that really is this slower cadence, slower types of demands, and not slower in a negative way, but just there's a certain business cadence that is already proven. We don't need to go through a whole lot of change. Maybe it's too difficult to make the change. Maybe our team members aren't interested in making that change. But it's also working with this other side of the business where maybe we're moving towards this idea of continuous delivery because the business is driving it that way. I mean, the core in all of this is that business is really driving the change overall, and business should be driving the change. So on our side, and what we wanted to highlight during this presentation today is the fact that we've got the ability to support both of these cadences within the existing and now the future beta ALM product that we'll be introducing a little bit later in this presentation here. So a way for organizations to continue working in what we'll call the proven, scalable, workflow-driven model, as well as organizations who want to move towards more agile, continuous delivery, higher levels of quality. And of course, that's one of the challenges as those organizations begin to improve or increase their cadence of delivery, just ensuring that that quality is still a part of the process. Now, again, there's all sorts of arguments and conversations one could make about how as we increase the cadence and we increase the delivery, that DevOps itself will drive a much higher quality product. I'm inclined to actually believe that. You're not going to get a higher speed of delivery without higher quality because poor quality is going to slow you down. So there's interesting side philosophical conversation we could potentially get into. But again, the idea is that we've got multiple cadences here. Now, what we see is when we look at our customer base, again, having many, many years of history and leadership within the quality space, quality is very critical. No doubt about it. If you look at where organizations are moving towards these faster models, faster ways of doing delivery, I would argue that quality is more critical than it's ever been because of the potential negative effects and how dangerous it could potentially be. Good examples. A lot of organizations do want to be able to release functionality because of business constraints and because of competitive situations, but at the same time, there's a very important need to protect things like the corporate image, ensuring that the end users are actually getting the right experience, that we're actually helping to detect some of these software problems and potential defects before we actually go live. I'm showing just on the screen here a snapshot of the World Quality Report, which was done with Capgemini and at the time HP, of course now HPE. And really talking about the fact that we've surveyed a number of customers, quality is just becoming very, very important. And more importantly, the role of the QA individual and the QA practitioner becomes very, very important within that process. That's one of the things you hear time and time again. You go to various conferences, you hear various presentations, you talk to various customers, and everybody wonders, if I'm a tester or if I'm involved in quality, and if we're moving towards this faster cadence, do I still have a role? And overwhelmingly, we're finding that yes, you absolutely do. In fact, you're very important in that process. We've moved with additional technology that we'll talk about here in the beta. Certainly, Vanden will be able to demo to show how we can support you in that process. And again, a couple more things just talking about testers. I think this is the most fascinating evolution within the industry itself, the fact that we went from this level of a waterfall development, we'll say within the industry, to maybe something more iterative, to maybe something more agile. People always wonder, well, what's my role within this world? What am I supposed to do? If we're going to pure agile, do we just basically get rid of the role of the tester and everybody does quality? Certainly there's some aspects around that where that could potentially work. I've seen equal number of instances in organizations that have gone agile with tester. It's actually still a tester, the role of the tester, and they're a direct member of that quality team or the actual release team, and they're providing a different focus than maybe they would have in the past. They're helping the overall team focus around quality. Maybe they're doing automation work. They're building test frameworks. You have the role of the dev tester becoming very prevalent in some of the more agile environments. But again, the key we're trying to leave everybody with here is as we begin to move forward as an industry, we're going faster to support the business, but quality is important, and the role of the tester, I would argue, and our data is beginning to argue, is absolutely critical. And again, we want to make sure that we're supporting that with some of the technology that you'll see shortly, in addition to some of the stuff that we've already got out there. Now, if we look at the overall industry and some of the business constraints that have driven this level of agility, what I also want to tell here is a story around why we've begun to build things a little bit differently on our side. What are the things that we're beginning to do? This is what we're calling our core beliefs. And this is very, very ingrained into what we're talking about in the beta, and that Vanden will be showing in a little bit here, so that you guys can take a look at. And we'll invite you, of course, to participate in our beta, which opens up in a couple of days. You'll see some more of that here at the end. Our core beliefs, things like all tests should be stored as code and versioned as code. And for a lot of reasons, obviously, we want to be able to maintain changes over time, but we also want to have some way for the business or for the folks who actually understand and represent the user community and the business community to actually do a transition to automation. Because as you go and move faster, manual testing may not disappear, but we do want to try and limit as much of the manual testing as possible to get that faster cadence. Continuous integration is important. This concept of continuous testing. You can't have speed without having quality directly ingrained within it. It's an interesting, again, that could be another philosophical argument unto itself. You need quality to be there in order to get the speed. I'll leave it at that for now. Lifecycle data actually empowers the team to make the best decisions. And this is the beauty of the platform that we've got today, as well as the platform that we're introducing in beta for this presentation here. You can leverage so much of the data that's within the system itself to either do levels of prediction. And so, for example, we have a predictive technology preview currently available. We can certainly talk about that a little bit later if there are questions. But there's already a lot of ALM data in the system itself to help the team really make decisions and avoid some of those pitfalls based on what we're actually capturing within our existing activities, rather than something you log and have to remember to put information in. Wouldn't it be great if we could just annotate the work that the team is already doing and use that data to help with the decision-making process? And again, the good news is we do have that. Again, no one-size methodology. Many organizations, we talked about the bimodal piece, have very, very different release cadences, very, very different drivers and things that they've got to do on their side to ensure the business is being properly supported. Open architectures. Again, organizations and team members and everybody else should be comfortable using a tool set they are most competent in, but we shouldn't have to lose their data and the work that they're doing and the metadata around that simply because they've chosen a different tool set that empowers them the most. We should be able to integrate with that. We should be able to pull that information and aggregate it into the larger system so that we can actually still have some mineable, usable data to help with decision making. One of the benefits I would argue that we've always had within our base is that there is still a single platform. We'll integrate with a lot of different technologies out there, and certainly more. Maybe talk about that a little bit later with the beta technology. But fundamentally, it is a single platform, and so we're able to report across the project. We're able to see where the status of things are, share work more easily between the various organizations that we need to. And the key one at the end is that core project assets should be accessible on demand from any platform. And this is the most exciting thing, I think, for me. There's a lot of exciting stuff, but I think the most exciting thing for me is how in the beta application that we'll talk a little bit about, the beta portion of ALM, we'll be able to actually access this on different browsers, different operating systems, on tablets, and potentially even on things like mobile phones. And so it's the ability for any organization to be able to access your core assets. They say that all sorts of inspiration can come at any moment. You don't want to necessarily have to forego being able to contribute to the system purely because you may not have the right device to access it at that time. Now, continuous testing. This is a sort of that evolutionary thing that we talk about. Continuous integration, of course, is important. That's been out there for a while. We've been talking about the concept around continuous testing as a bookend to that process to help with agility. But really, to call out the fact that as we're going through the process of doing builds, commits, changing functionality, and so forth, there is an ingrained level of testing involved within that, not just unit testing, but actually validating the end user functionality, making sure that the usability is checked in as well or validated as well. And so we're able to support that with current technology, but we're actually offering a much more interesting way of supporting it. And certainly Ben will talk about this during the demonstration in the beta product that we'll talk about here. Again, one of the more interesting things is the fact that as we begin to move toward this higher level of agility, certainly teams begin to become closer. Teams may even want to share tools. In order to shorten the amount of time it takes to actually evolve a lot of these assets, our platform is actually leveraging Git effectively as the back-end architecture, and it could potentially be the same Git that the development team could be referencing within the ID. And so what we're seeing here, just an example of a test, maybe stored as a text file. Maybe it's a Gherkin, we call it a test, we'll just call it that for now. But being able to use that with that same Git repository as the way to start automation in something like Selenium or LeanFT. And actually, rather than having to have a lengthy communication or actually passing something to somebody else, it's actually the same repository. And so we can actually share that and use it as a faster way to be able to jumpstart that process. Again, empowering the testing community, empowering quality people to be able to have meaningful conversations with the development team, because we're using a very similar tool set now. The other thing that's always very interesting, and this is maybe unique to us and a few other vendors, is that we do spend a lot of time with the enterprise. Certainly we have customers of all different sizes, all different shapes, all different industries, but we do spend predominantly a lot of our time working with the enterprise. And Agile within the enterprise does have additional considerations. Again, you can be a purist and say, well, no, Agile is Agile or Scrum is Scrum, but the reality is any organization moving or changing their cadence has certain other things that we need to be considering. Certainly within the enterprise, any system supporting the team has certain issues around size and scale that are very, very different than a smaller organization would have. And while the team may still be a Scrum team in the large enterprise, at some point these need to aggregate into a larger project, or at least a larger view of that project, so we can understand what things are doing. There's maybe different security constraints. There's maybe different access and permissioning constraints. There's maybe a dependency, I would say most likely, on legacy systems. We see that probably as the most common thing in the larger enterprises. It doesn't make sense to rewrite everything just because it's not the coolest technology. We rewrite and we rebuild and we do what we need to do to support the business first and foremost. There may be outsourcing agreements. There may be HR constraints within some organizations that make it much harder for companies to actually just decide one day, well, now we're doing full Agile. And that's why we see these hybrid Agile-ist or call them more iterative-ish methodologies, Scrum or Fall potentially, though I'm not necessarily meaning that, because organizations ultimately, if you can support what you're trying to do with your business, you should be doing that. Of course, there's also legal constraints. I certainly know, being at a larger company, we have to pay very special attention to a lot of those types of things. So again, the idea is basically, when we talk about the technology itself, and certainly the beta piece that we'll be introducing here again in a moment, these are the types of things that we've been thinking about. These are the types of things that our customers have been talking to us about as a way to support these types of business initiatives moving forward. We're going to continue, and we do support the Scaled Agile framework within the Agile Manager product, and the Agile Manager product will be able to continue to integrate with what we've got coming out here and what we're showcasing here today. We are architecting our best practices directly into this platform itself. We're not enforcing a methodology, but a lot of the ways we're doing things are ways of taking lessons learned from our customers, things that we do ourselves very well that support a very, very reliable form of delivery to the business, and actually ingraining that into the technology. So if companies don't know how necessarily to start, we hear that often actually, some organizations may want to introduce their own process, but equal numbers sometimes say, well, no, you're the expert. What would you recommend we do? And so that's what we're introducing sort of out of the box for organizations who need that additional assistance. We're also introducing a very, very open and extensible environment. I think this is one of the neat things. Looking at the Swagger documentation, for example. So if you're looking to extend the beta technology into other systems, for example, I saw one of our engineers actually show an integration with Slack that they had built fairly quickly, actually, with the REST API. Swagger helps actually create some of those call them messages, so it's much easier to be able to do this stuff. Policy and process guidance and things like that. And again, I'll talk about some of these functionalities in a little bit more detail here before we get into the demonstration itself. But again, the idea is that enterprise Agile support is one of those things that we've done, and we've enhanced certainly within this new platform that we're going to talk to you guys about here in just a second. Fundamentally, when you look at organizations, collaboration is one of those things that helps with speed and helps with your time to market and with your delivery. And collaboration is one of those ways that we can help avoid the rework. It's one of those ways that we can stop potential miscommunications from occurring. Where I'm going with this is the idea that it's always been about more than defect tracking. And that's one of the values we've always had within ALM itself. It's really interesting in the beta environment to see how relationships can be visually represented between different things. So for example, if we find a defect during a regression test, we can actually connect that and show how that's related to the test and how that test is then related to maybe a user story or to a requirement. It's that relationship or the connection between these artifacts that help the team ultimately get that higher level of velocity or ultimately set the expectations or help with the prioritization of work. Defects unto themselves, it's an entity, it's a line in a spreadsheet. But when I begin to connect those artifacts together to different things, they begin to mean more to me. I have more empowerment as far as decisions I can make. I know which user stories, for example, probably aren't to be able to ship or get broken or something like that, so I can set some sort of an expectation with my end users. It also helps us understand for sharing and reuse and for impact analysis. If I'm changing something for one reason, I may be sharing it with another project who's consuming part of what I've done. I now know in certain ways, you can see a visual example here, how that impact is actually going to affect everybody else in the project. So I can make smarter decisions, I can involve that better in that earlier process, so I'm not having to build something, pull it apart, and build it again. The scrap and the rework that is very, very common that we're trying to avoid to help us get that velocity. Now, one of the more interesting things, I'm going to save some of this for Vanden to talk about a little bit here in a moment, but inside the beta environment, we've really taken a different view in aggregating quality. And I don't want to steal the thunder too much from Vanden here, but you're not going to see a test module directly inside of the beta. But testing is ingrained very deeply across it. So the idea was testing isn't just this thing that happens. Testing in a lot of cases is an ongoing process, especially as you're beginning to deliver much more iteratively throughout the process. You may take something like a feature that was delivered and that goes into the backlog, and maybe it's less relevant being in the backlog, but you still have to be able to test it moving forward. And maybe we want to, as we're sharing pieces together, reuse certain tests that are leveraging the similar common shared environment. And so we're calling this the aggregated view of quality across the whole life cycle. Rather than just having a test module or a test plan, we can actually view testing within the context that makes sense to us in that moment, whether it's a reuse, whether it's just checking status or anything like that. Again, we'll let Vanden show a little bit more of that as he goes through the demonstration. Again, one of the core things that we did within the beta itself, and it's always been core to us, is really this idea of embracing open source. Even in the current version of ALM today, we have integrations into things like Subversion, Jenkins, there's Git connections, there's all sorts of stuff that's just been out there forever. We do support, for example, Selenium execution with the ALM version today. What we're introducing is Gherkin framework support directly in the new beta environment here. So it's a structured manual test format that allows for a much easier way to transition to automation. And so if organizations still have the concept of somebody who's maybe a product owner or somebody in the team writing what we would call a requirement or potentially a user story, they may also be able to write level of validation that could be a much easier transition to automation when we go to things like a Selenium test or a Lean FT test to actually do automated validation of that. And so there's a lot of support around open source. We're going to continue to do that because that's what our customers have told us. That's what we're seeing successfully work inside so many organizations. Now, just a few words on the actual beta itself, and then I'll pass things over here to Vanden to go into the demonstration. What we've got in the architecture of the beta is really ALM is the product. HPE ALM, we've got the version that's out there today. In the beta, there's the .NET piece that is the traditional piece today. What we're introducing as well, though, is separate functionality included within that license to offer additional velocity. It's a separate UI, a separate installation, but the two pieces can work together. They can synchronize together. They can integrate with outside tools. The difference being in the beta piece, our backend, or call it the repository, isn't a flat file system, it's Git. And in fact, whereas in ALM.NET, or the classic version, some people have called it in the past, I think I prefer the .NET. Jenkins was something we connected with. In the beta environment, you'll see during the demonstration, we leverage Jenkins integrally to the process. And a number of different build systems, or build systems specifically. But Jenkins is the one that I think is most common in organizations. Again, I'll let Vanden talk about that. But the idea is they are two separate installations, not a new product we're introducing here, It's a different environment for you to use. They can talk to each other. They can integrate with things like Agile Manager. They can integrate with things like UFT, all that other stuff that you got today still works in this environment. And again, we'll get to that. Now, from 20,000 feet, what's in this new beta set of functionality, this new installation that we're calling part of ALM itself? There's really 5 functional areas we're including within that. There's planning, there's the definition, defining, building, testing, and tracking. Now, all of the various functionalities are the things that we're doing within that, whether we're talking backlogs, user stories, building, whether we're talking about defect tracking, executing a test, building a test, all that stuff is ingrained within this. But from the high level, this is what we're offering in the environment. And if organizations are doing things like maybe I've got a group using a different defect tracking tool, or maybe I've got a group that's using a different testing environment or something like that, our goal is to try and integrate with that, because when we pull that information into our environment, we're able to use that for a number of different analysis, metrics, and just a good understanding of what the overall team is doing. And so we want to be that play nice in the sandbox, or that version of record, maybe is a better way of putting it, where we can let organizations and let teams use the tools that they're more comfortable with at the ground level, but still have integrations and be able to pull that in and make sense of it at the planning and understanding level for everybody. I'll talk about those 5 areas here just very briefly here. You've got some screenshots visible in this slide here, really helping us at the planning stage to understand progress. There are a number of drill down reports available in a number of different places, really within the context that you see most valuable to the activities that you're working on. There's an overview or a dashboard module where I can get a view of all the aggregated metrics across different disciplines. So for example, if I wanted a view that showed things like open defects, quantity of work being done, tests being executed, user stories that have no tests connected to them, that kind of metric is all visible in a place. But similarly, if I go to different parts of the environment because I'm doing something more related to tests, or more related to builds, or more related to user story definition, I have additional progress reports, drill down graphs that I can actually have access to as well. In the definition portion, we're talking about logging requirements, logging backlog items, user stories. It's a collaborative workspace to help us actually build and prioritize what that backlog is. So we can create a standard way of documenting these items, a standard workflow to support that, customizable forms and fields that actually help the team create quick content, but still have some form of management and auditability for things like doing reports and analysis a little bit later on. Again, the idea is people are working, we don't want to have to create an environment for people to log like a time card. We want to be able to leverage the work you're actually doing to be able to pull back and understand progress or help guide the decision making. Again, in the definition phase here, the concept of relationships. Ben is going to show this during the demonstration itself. Really, the idea is traceability across the entire life cycle. A visualization of it, in fact, and the fact that I can actually have a test connected to a user story, for example, or I can understand that a defect was connected based on a run, and that run was connected to a test, the test was connected to the user story, and understanding that changes or impacts of that have a certain level of cost or time to the overall organization, or at least it gives us a better conversation if we have a stand-up meeting and we're doing true agile. On the build side, we are leveraging the build system in a way that we've never done it before. I think it's really quite fantastic. The fact that we've got in this demo, and certainly Brandon will talk about this, Jenkins, and being able to actually audit the Jenkins jobs and show a visualization of what that delivery pipeline looks like, being able to actually potentially kick off that pipeline within our environment, or at the very least understand as we've got tests being run to validate that pipeline, what the state of that is. Maybe be able to drill in and create a defect based on some of those things, and have a lot of the metadata around the context of that failure in the test be pre-populated within the defect itself, saving us money, helping us communicate more effectively. And of course, even though you're not going to see a test module by itself inside here, testing is incredibly important, and it's incredibly ingrained within the overall product itself. And what we've done, again, is made that distinction between, it's not a test plan. You have tests that support certain things, certain applications or certain components that we're developing, or tests that reference or validate certain user stories. And the fact that I can actually see them in context in different places really help with that process of rapidly creating information, automatically creating traceability. But of course, manual tests, probably what a lot of our customers are going to start off doing an awful lot of. We wanted to provide an ability to connect those things, to build those things effectively, but also when we move to automation, a way to make that path a whole lot easier for the team, especially if the organization is bimodal and we have folks who are spending time understanding the business versus folks who are doing levels of automation. Maybe we've made that role a little bit more distinct. I think the Gherkin stuff is very, very exciting. The concept of just behavior-driven development is becoming very, very prevalent. You can see a lot of the analysts are talking about that, and certainly our customers are talking about it as well. And the fact that we're actually releasing Gherkin support within the package itself, huge, huge example. And Brandon may actually show a demonstration of that as he goes into the product. The track piece itself is really helping us to understand aggregated quality across the entire application. And so the fact that I may be able to share tests between different releases. So different teams maybe are working on shared assets. Rather than having to have the same test written 3-4 times, I can actually write it once. I can have different versions of that test, and I can reuse those tests depending on what the build is, which pipeline I'm referencing it, and so forth. So we're able to track this, and of course, as we find defects, certainly log a defect into the system itself if we're choosing to do that within our process. Again, not every organization necessarily tracks a defect if you're doing true agile. Some organizations have opted to decide that a defect is really just an incomplete user story. But we're supporting both types of methodologies, and it's very easy and very flexible as far as how you would configure this and how you would just bring this out to support your team. So at this point here, what I'm going to do is pass things over to Vanden, and he's going to walk through a demonstration, and certainly will help answer any additional questions after that. Vanden.
Vanden, you're on mute still. We can't hear you. Can you come off mute to share with the team?
Yes, I am. Great. Thank you for that. Hi, my name is Vanden Naik, and I'm the Senior Product Manager here at HPE Software, responsible for the next-gen ALM platform. Most of the things that Matt talked about are, I would say, capabilities that we have invested in the next-gen ALM platform to both provide some of the, I would say, modern capabilities that teams desire in terms of application development. So what I'd like to share with you today is a sandbox environment. This is an environment that we have right now, which is live. We have had a private beta with a few customers in the past few weeks, and we intend to have a public beta pretty soon in a couple of days in here. You can look at first the browser itself. So the browser itself that I've launched next-gen ALM is Chrome. So no longer are we restricted by the .NET technology stack that we've had with ALM. So we can go into other browsers and other operating systems as well, no longer just IE and Windows only. Along with trying to get rid of the technological limitations that we had with the .NET technology, many of the things that we have invested in and part of next-gen ALM are to do with the UI and try to simplify some of the use cases that we have there. So just looking at the high-level modules of what we have available, you can see that this is completely different from what we have had in the past. So no longer test plan, no longer test lab. The context of all the entities regarding testing, regarding quality, are now made more in context with the larger life cycle flow itself, rather than have it as separate entities in there. So you might see that there are certain areas which you still are not being lit up. You would see that requirements is still not there. So requirements is coming. It's something that we intend to go provide towards, I'd say, the second half of the year. Same thing to do with many of the Agile Manager capabilities that Matt talked about. So he talked about SAFE, and those are capabilities that would be provided as part of the Agile Manager capabilities that we port on to this next-gen ALM platform. So the first drop that we have for next-gen ALM is focused primarily around quality and redefining literally as to what quality is all about. Let's start off with the views itself. So what's the dashboard? The dashboard is the screen that you're looking at right now. It's a view which gives you a very quick overview of the status of tests that are being executed today. and allows you to drill down into either the defects or into the various categories that you have of the tests based on environments in there. Again, you can set up multiple kinds of graphs in here, so I'll walk through that a little bit. But the idea is to make it very easy as soon as someone just logs in to identify as to what was the status of the quality for the last build, for the team as to what tests are the teams working on, and what's the number of defects and the criticality of those in one single view in there. We're bringing.
Hey, Vanden, excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to ask you to speak just a little bit louder for the audience. That would be great.
Sure, we'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
So the next module that we're introducing in here is the backlog module. And think of the backlog as the conduit in terms of connecting those new requirements, as you can have the way of tracking requirements in an agile methodology, as well as you can use the same backlog in terms of tracking, I would say, the needs for traditional requirements as well. We will have a separate requirements module, which would be focused around authoring and getting some of those capabilities in there. Those would be integrated into the backlog module, so you can go track the activities that you need in the backlog itself. Another module that we are introducing is application modules. And in the application modules, the whole rationale behind us introducing that is to provide the flexibility of a hierarchy. And many a times in the application that we define, the goal for us is to have a logical representation of what that application is all about. So you can have, say, a login module, you could have a my account module, you can have a transaction module, you can have a messaging, a chat module, and you can have a logout module. This might be some of the modules that you have. Many times we see customers using UDFs or other fields of trying to capture specific activity that happens in a logical part of the application, because that allows you to drill down into that. Now, application modules gives you that flexibility to maintain that kind of a hierarchy, and also gives you a logical view of the application itself, around which you can then construct your requirements, track your defects, and track also all kind of testing that's done. The module that's most exciting, I think, is the pipelines. And this is where we have native integrations into CI servers. And with a CI server, with continuous integration in there, now becoming more and more mainstream, the idea is that testing and quality would be all executed each time a build is triggered. And making that notion front and central and native to the quality view, in our mind, is critical if you want to have an enterprise view, especially across multiple teams, multiple builds in there. And then the traditional defects module itself. So let's go have a deep dive into each of these modules. So looking at just the dashboard module, you can see me here, look at the dashboard capabilities in here, the environments that have been tracked in here. You can see this being primarily done through tags that we have. So tagging is another new capability that we have introduced in Next-Gen ALM. Gives you the flexibility to go about adding custom tags that could be created by the teams or by the administrator, so that there's consistency across all the projects that we create in here. If I needed to drill down into any of these tests, I can simply click on them, and that brings me all the details for that specific column, and I can drill down into that test quite quickly. So the tagging that I referred to here, again, very visual. You can see that. You can see the status as to who created that specific test, and now we're looking at all the test runs in here. If I need to drill down into that test, quite quickly I can go back in here and look at where this specific test is. Now, in this case, what I'm seeing here is the relationships. This is the traceability that, again, comes quite natively because of the in-context that flow that we have built in. So when you build a test in context to a user story, and you have a test run, you have automatic linkages between all these entities that would get highlighted through the visual representation that we just shared here. If we go ahead and want to go about now having custom dashboard widgets, so you can go about creating your own widgets. There's an option here called Create Custom Graph. You can pick one. In this case, I'll just click through it. You can go about now having entities that you could choose. Entities in this case right now that we have our defects, test runs, and tests. I can choose that. I can choose a specific release in here. what kind of display would we like? If we would like a pie chart or just a regular column chart, we can do that. We'll go about now providing additional capabilities in the future. Some of the exciting ones that we are looking at are primarily around trending and trying to get those in here. The ability to go just customize the X and Y axis and also group by. And then very quickly, you can get a preview of what you're looking at. So if this is something that you would want to save, you can go ahead and save this. If you'd like to just cancel out of it and keep just the out of the box, you can do that. So very easy in terms of creating dashboard widgets and customizing the view around what's happening from a quality standpoint that you have. Again, some of the menus here lets you go reconfigure the UI itself. If you want to export some of these widgets and get them into an Excel spreadsheet, you can export them again in here. So making it very interactive and customizable and also very visual is one of the key aspects of how we enhance the dashboard that we have currently on ALM to the next gen ALM in here. The second module that we're going to look at is the backlog module. Now in the backlog module, again, the core part that we want to emphasize is we are keeping a more of a hierarchical view, looking at it of how you can track traditional requirements today, as well as you can have agile requirements in here. So on the left frame, when you see me talk about backlog, you can see these are the high-level themes in here. Now, once I have it highlighted on the theme, I can get to the specific features that are being built, which are the same ones that you see here in the trees. If I drill down in here, I can now get to the specific stories itself. And again, those are the stories that you would see here as well. So keeping this all in context of the hierarchies that we have, as we go about now incorporating more Agile Manager capabilities in here in the future, you can see the backlog being literally the key control point in terms of the integration, which allows us to have support for both traditional, I would say, waterfall-based methodologies, as well as incorporate Agile quite easily into the same UI in here. So let's look at what do we have here from a contact management standpoint, and we'll look at this as one of the features in here. So again, looking at the tests that are being executed for this feature, I get an entire list of all the tests that are being executed here, a complete view. You can see us now giving you a single view of all the runs that have been executed, and you would know the status of this quite quickly. The icon that you see here around footsteps is the number of steps that actually are executed. And this gives you a view of the status of where this entity is, whether it is still in design, whether it's done, whether it's new. And this is something that we would use quite heavily based on the new business rules engine that we have set up. The business rules engine now helps replace what workflow did provide us in the .NET client, and I'll show as to how those capabilities are incorporated in here as well. So let's go to some of the newer capabilities around the testing itself here. So let's see, one of the tests that I like to highlight in here is what Matt talked about around Gherkin. So I'm bringing up one of the tests that I've configured in here with a Gherkin framework. So Gherkin, if you have had a chance to look at that, is one of the frameworks that supports BDD-based development. And with the notion of BDD, the idea is to go about now capturing both just the business requirement and also the test that you would want to have. And this could be how you could potentially take a business requirement, use it also as a validation requirement, and then execute that and also automate that in the future. As teams move towards the notion of a more agile practices, more BDD-based development, this is where Gherkin becomes kind of the front and center. And what we've done in terms of Gherkin is now added this editor that allows you to incorporate a feature file and gives you the given when-then scenarios that you can see me talking about here and have parameters defined in here. So these parameters of customer, membership, or payment are the ones that you can see us talking through here, and you can simply type that out in the specific language that Gherkin provides you and gives you a way now to track all the things in terms of a manual test execution. So this could be the validation that you would want to do. Now, as you're doing this, you might say, okay, these are tests that I'm doing. Where am I going to save this? But let me go ahead and just make a save in here. So let me say XYZ. Just keep that in here. I go and save. I say version 5. I save that in here. And I'd like to go about now looking at what are the versions that I have. So very quickly, you can see all the versions that we've had of this specific gherkin test in here. And now, how do we do this? We do this because we are leveraging the capabilities of Git. So Git, a part of it has been embedded within the platform itself, and this gives us the ability to now natively leverage the versioning capabilities and give you the comparisons between versions. So if I hit the compare button very quickly, I can compare the version changes that have happened between the two. So let's see as to what changed between version 2 and version 5 and version 3. You can see that it's very quickly highlighted in here. Now, if I needed to know who made those changes, again, with Git, there's a very rich plugin frameworks that we have that we can use. And there's something called as Git blame. The idea there with Git blame is to go about providing information as to the user or the developer or the tester who's made those changes in here. So in this case, I can very easily see to every line of change who's made those changes. In this case, obviously, it's me who's made all those changes, so you can see me. But if you have a team of individuals and people are working on the same feature file or the same test itself, it's quick to identify who made that change so that if you need to collaborate with that other individual, it's easy for you to find out and ask them as to why they made a specific change in there. So again, the whole notion of introducing Gherkin primarily as the future of looking at how manual testing is going to happen in the agile environment. If we need to go run this test, again, I can go about running it. Oops, seems like I have an syntax error. Oh, that's because of the XYZ that I just added. So let's make sure I get rid of that. Save it again, go to version 6. And let's go ahead and run this. So use this as a dev environment in here. Let's go run. This is where you would see the familiar manual runner UI come up. And very easily you could see us in here talk about 5 scenarios. Now these 5 scenarios represent the parameters that you could configure in here. So each one of them you can now have, these are the scenarios that you would set up as you execute the manual test itself. And now as you mark the success or the failure of that specific scenario, it's quite easy for you to go about marking the status of it. If there are actual comments that you'd like to incorporate, you can go about now incorporating them in here. If you would like to go about now logging defects in there, there's no defects currently, but if you want to go about adding defects, it's quite easy for you to incorporate and add defects. Again, gives you a similar UI of what you have in the defects module in a much slimmer manner so that you can make attachments and add newer capabilities in here. So do we also go about supporting the manual testing in the traditional manner? And the answer is absolutely yes. So if we go back to another test and we look at manual testing that's done in here, this one is the one where we still have a Gherkin file. Let me go about now picking an acceptance test. If we have traditional testing where you still do test step-based approaches, we have tried to simplify that as well with the modern editor. So you don't necessarily have to do Gherkin, but if you do Gherkin, that's great because we support that natively. In the UI here now, I can give you a more test step-based approach, which is typically step 1, step 2, step 3 that we're all familiar with. We can go about now having this done in Excel. We can upload and export and import those capabilities in here. Now, as you also work along with it, we can use the native editor itself. So give me just 1 second here, and I can switch this now into an editor view. So I can simply type the same steps in here quite quickly rather than have a step 1 step through. So it gives you improved productivity in terms of writing your manual tests. You have easy assertive languages that define what your steps are. If you want to validate specific steps, this is another easy assertion that we have inserted in here, which allows you to now validate whether this step actually passed or failed. So this would be a status that would be associated with a step that has a question mark in there. So again, looking at just focus on manual testing, how we can go about enhancing and improving that is simplifying the UI, introducing Gherkin, giving you a new manual runner are some of the big investments that we've made around manual testing itself. So let's move on from here itself. On the UI in here, again, we can look at how we have introduced the notion of tagging. I talked about that a little bit. With tagging, you have administrators who can go configure the tags, or we can have users who go create those tags real times. And you can go click on these. This goes ahead and bringing about only those tests that are automation tests. What I'm doing right now is a right click. So you can see me, it's like a strike through. And it means it brings me all the tests that are not automated tests in here. And if I want to go ahead again and bring everything back up, much easier in terms of a user interface from a filtering standpoint, from a tracking standpoint, again, using modern concepts of tagging to make it much easier in here. So let's go back again to the modules. The next module that we would like to look at is the application modules. And if you remember, I mentioned about application modules being more of a logical representation of how the application is structured. And this is completely up to you as a user to go define the flow that you would have. You would set up a hierarchy in here as to what you would want to track. And then all the tests and all the defects that you would have would be in the context that would be have of the specific test in here. So let's look at specific one in here. Context. See here. Seems like the one that we're looking at is missing. So again, from an overview standpoint, you have the ability to track tests, track defects in the hierarchy of an application module itself. So the next one that we have is pipeline, and this is kind of the new thing that we've incorporated. I talked about it being native in here. As teams adopt CI processes, you can see us incorporating servers like Jenkins or having other CI servers. So you could have Team City. You might have also other CI servers like Bamboo in here. For us, as tests get executed, as builds get put out, the testing tends to happen with the build process itself, providing the user and the teams complete insight into the build execution flow itself and giving you an overview of what tests were executed. Are these unit tests? Are these system level tests? If there are failures in the test, you can go very easily click on those failures itself, and that will take you to that specific test in here. So you can go address those tests in the testing tool and go rerun this test. If I needed to go run this test right now, I can go about very easily, just run this test from here. So it doesn't have to be triggered through Jenkins each time. I have complete control if I have the permissions to go about executing this test. So if I run this, it'll probably take a few minutes to go run it, but this gives me, again, a complete view of the pipeline, all the jobs that are being executed as we go through this. Now, the other view that we introduced in the pipeline view is what we call an overview. And that's, think of this as one of those large plasma views that you have on one of the screens that allows you to track the multiple builds that are happening. So as you have more and more teams that are executing tests and you have builds being, I would say, put out, you want to have complete visibility as to what's the status of this. So while this one is spinning and executing its test, let's look at a past one right here. So you can see all the tests that have happened in here, what passed, what failed, what's the kind of history. So you know in the past 5 builds that you put out there, were there successes, were there failures, what's the build number in here. So for us, again, is providing that easy overview of building assets, and as to, for you, if you had to drill down into it, quite quickly you can go back to the pipeline and get a complete view of the status itself. The other thing that we've introduced in here is around configuration. So this allows you to go about now tracking what kinds of tests are being executed. So let me do that one more time with the view in here. So let's see. So in this specific view, you can see us giving you a quick capture of all the tests. While if you enter here the configuration, I see all specific tags that we have identified in terms of the tests and specific environments that we have configured. So giving you the ability to go tag tests and track them. Again, to make it easier for you to report is one of the easy of use things that we've incorporated. Now you might wonder saying, okay, if you have the entire pipeline and this is a few hundred jobs, if not more, do I need to go execute the pipeline each and every time in here? And the answer is no. You can go about now creating a custom pipeline. Given the integration that you have to a CI server itself, I can go about calling it, say, test 1. I can pick a release that I want to run in here. So let me just pick a number and pick the CI server. Once I pick the CI server, I have access to all the jobs that are being executed in here. So I can create custom pipelines. So think of this as test sets, or I would say multiple test flows that you can go configure in here. And we are starting off right now with the notion of just one job, but we can definitely look at how we can incorporate other jobs in there. And this could be a custom pipeline that you create. And once I create a custom pipeline, I can just execute specific tests that I need to run rather than trigger the entire build each and every time. So giving you the flexibility and the adaptability to focus on quality of specific areas of specific tests is what the custom pipeline allows you to do. In addition to having an entire quality view all the way through from either a dev environment or from the staging environment in here. The traditional defects module that we're all quite familiar with, again, still is available with many of the rich capabilities that we talked around the UI, around tagging, around just managing it in here. Again, multiple views of how you can track this. You can have the traditional grid view of what we call the fat grid view as well as you go work with defects. Now, in the new platform itself, there are many architecture changes that have happened. And one of the core things that we are looking to embed is to embed an Elasticsearch engine in here. So Elasticsearch would need to be configured separately, but as soon as you incorporate Elasticsearch, it now gives you the power to go search through literally all the entities that we have in the lifecycle. So let me just search for the word message. And what I'd see is every defect, every test, every backlog item that has the word message shows up. So think of this as a scenario where you're trying to track down a specific error message, or you're trying to track down a specific requirement, and you're interested in finding out who else has run into this, what other teams have faced it. Quite quickly from a given installation of next-gen ALM, if you have Elastic connected to all these projects in here, it's quickly for you to go able to pull that information in, so you can now start collaborating with those individuals or those teams because you have the similarity in the error messages. Now,
and Vandan, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second just to let the audience know that we are going to be extending the webinar another 15 minutes. This is great stuff. We're getting a lot of great questions in here, Vandan, so just wanted to make you aware of that.
Sure.
So back to you, but I did want to let the audience know that we're extending the webinar a bit.
Great. Thank you, Bob. So the last thing, as I went through the entire UI in here to talk about what next-gen ALM is all about, I talked about requirements coming in the future. I talked about agile capabilities coming in the future. There are a lot of exciting things that we have from a collaboration standpoint that we want to bring to the table. But let's talk a little bit around the administration aspect in here. So the view that I'm going to right now is more of the admin view that you would have as you look at next-gen ALM. Again, completely different from what you have from a traditional standpoint. And we can look at some of the entities that we have defined in here. We talked about the web client now having no downloads. So there's no longer any .NET controls at all, which means workflow gets implemented in a completely new manner. And workflow now is implemented on the server side. So what does that mean? That means that we have now a rules engine that is put in place, which actually goes about executing on specific entities. So you can see me show things around defects. And we have created these out-of-the-box rules and states that we have defined. So we call this the state engine. And within the state engine itself, I have defined multiple flows. The dark lines are the preferred flows. So it gives you what the organization has chosen as a preferred flow. The dotted lines are an optional flow that is still allowed in here. Now, as I'm doing this, I can go about now configuring rules. These rules are specific actions that would happen each time that an event is triggered. So each time the state changes, Do I want a specific list of values to be populated? Do I want certain fields to be hidden in there? This is where I would go configure the workflow. And you can look at us making the capabilities of designing those forms, having those quite easily configured in here, creating the workflow and providing you that quite easily as well as a mechanism to go build, I would say, modern workflow more through the UI and doing this in a manner which is more visual, so it's no longer scripting necessarily on the client side itself. The definition of the releases would come in here, definition of the teams, and who would be the team members as to how you go about now aggregating or assigning work. We talked about CI servers, so if you want to configure multiple CI servers, you can go do that. In fact, in the way we would like it to have it is we would want you to connect your existing Jenkins server to one of the instances that we would have in the beta. So once you do participate in the beta, if you can connect your existing Jenkins server to the beta instance itself, the pipeline that I just showed you would get lit up and you would be able to get the complete value of what testing and insights from a quality standpoint we have in there. So the executors here, again, gives you the capability of defining what executors you might want to define in the future. So today we support the JUnit, NUnit-based, and MS Unit-based executors. As we go about expanding it, our intention is to now open this up in a framework that you can extend in here. So you could have other executors also being supported. And from a test assignment rules, think of this as, again, building automatic linkage in there. You can define rules for specific tests that are being executed, and you can assign them to specific application modules. This is where you could say that, okay, this specific test has to get assigned to this specific application module, automatically building the traceability to that application module or to that backlog requirement in there. Again, making it easier in terms of getting traceability from an end-to-end perspective and also automating that in here. So given the fact that now I just showed all of you what we have from a next-gen ALM perspective, again, lots of things currently in private beta, but the public beta will happen quite soon. What I'd like to encourage you to do is to go sign up for the public beta, and this will happen on March the 24th. Here's the URL. We will have this. We have a SaaS online BU portal that will allow you to sign up for the next-gen beta. Feel free to go sign up. You would get your own dedicated workspace that you could go connect all the things that I showed around backlog, around application modules, around Jenkins, around Gherkin. You would have the ability to play to it and play with it, integrate your Jenkins with it. This is what we really love to see. And you'd love to give us feedback on this. So with that, Bob, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Vandan. Great job. That was very interesting, and we have got some excellent questions. So the first one is, how do these changes affect the ALM administration application?
So from an ALM administration standpoint, definitely there are big changes. You saw me talk to a little bit around administration capabilities in here. We are still in the process of adding much more capabilities, but at a higher level, I can tell you that our focus is to make the life of a project administrator and a site administrator much easier. You can see that workflow has been one of those challenges that we've had. We want to go about now taking that into business rules, and that allows the upgrades to be much more easier. The fact that we no longer have to deploy a client and packaging of a client, the deploying of the client, again, makes it much more easier, because pushing out patches today, pushing out newer upgrades tends to be a challenge because of the security or the hardening of the desktops that we have in here. From an admin standpoint, other capabilities that we would want to focus on is the new schema. So the new schema that we are introducing with NextGen ALM can host multiple projects. So today we have a one project, one schema, which means if you have 100 projects, you have to upgrade 100 database schemas. With NextGen ALM, it's going to be one schema that potentially can host hundreds of projects. And what we'd want to do is then make it easier for you to upgrade. And these are some of the capabilities and the learnings that we have already seen with Agile Manager. So the model that we have from a platform perspective is out there for a few years, so it's not completely new. And the learnings that we've had with Agile Manager are what we are incorporating now more mainstream into NextGen ALM. So hopefully it makes it much easier, but it'll be a different UI for an administrator.
Brandon, could you actually put the trial URL back up? I know a number of people were asking. Sure. For everybody who's interested, the URL is not live yet, so I know a number of folks have tried to go there right now. It will be live on the 24th.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thanks. So now another question for you. For customers who have their defect module workflow heavily customized by VB script, what plans are in place to migrate this code into business rules when we move to next-gen ALM? Or would we need to customize our own business rules when we upgrade and migrate?
That's a very good question. And from our standpoint, what we believe is many of the out-of-the-box capabilities that we have from a business rules perspective should cover you from, I would say, workflow perspective. Now, if there's very heavy customization, absolutely not in terms of the first release that we have, but we are definitely working today on figuring out how to incorporate that. So my answer would be, give the existing business rules, the out-of-the-box business rules, a chance. Go about incorporating those capabilities in there, and if you do find specific gaps in there and there are specific customization that needs to happen, give us that feedback. We are exploring actively multiple ways of invoking existing workflow from the business rules engine. We are looking to make the business rules engine also exposed using a JSON framework, so you can actually script through it in there, but not in the VB script manner, but in different scripting framework. So there are lots of ways that we are looking to do, but we believe fundamentally that we have enough capabilities for teams to get started. And if there are gaps or deltas that we need to go close, we'll be definitely more than happy to look at some of the ways to go address those.
All right, great. Another question. I know on one of the slides that there was a great view of what looked like different projects. So this question, I believe, is specific to that slide. It's asking if that view was a cross-project view, and how does the new version work in regards to working with different projects?
So that's another great question in there. Today from the views itself, so it's very, I would say, workspace focused. So you can see us talk around workspaces. But given the fact that we've had the changes that I just alluded to earlier, which is in one database schema, we can now have hundreds of projects. We can provide easy cross-project asset sharing as well as easy cross-project reporting in here. So what I shared today, it does not have the cross-project capabilities. It's still very individual project-based or individual workspace-focused. However, incorporating cross-project capabilities is very simple, and we don't have any of the existing limitations today. We offer around 6 in the earlier version and 12 in 12.2 of how much you can do around reporting. So most of those limitations kind of go away, but cross-project is still yet to come, so it's not there yet.
Okay, very good. Another question, great question here. Will the pipeline support TFS?
I think that's one of those questions, along with, I think that another question that we had earlier was around Bamboo. So from our standpoint around integrations, what we'd like to do is we'd like to provide out-of-the-box integrations. We're starting off with Jenkins. The next one that we are actually targeting is TeamCity in there. So with TFS, I'd like to say that it's on the roadmap right now. But what we want to do is, rather than us in HPE being responsible to provide each and every adapter, at some point you would see us put out public APIs, which we can now integrate easily into other CI servers. So if you have other CI servers like Travis CI, Circle CI, or Concord CI, it doesn't really matter what CI server. Once we provide you the public APIs to integrate with it, there would be a mechanism to easily incorporate those flows into next-gen ALM, the pipeline view.
Great. And I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Does the new ALM architecture include a file repository as it does in current ALM versions?
So we have the notion of a file repository. It won't be the same as in the existing file repository. And the reason I say that is we want to go about incorporating more I would say, open source technologies or leveraging the customer source code management tools. So I talked about Git being one of the repositories and that we intend to use, mainly around all the manual testing capabilities that I showcased. For us, we look at that as one of the ways of where you would have a repo of saving those assets in there. We also want to incorporate or connect to the customer's environment in there. So the notion of the file repository changes compared to what we have traditionally today, where we store most of the UFT and the QTP tests in here. But it does now morph and ties itself more closer to source code management. So we will intend to use that heavily going forward.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Does the new ALM include project workflow? And if so, what languages are supported?
So with project workflow, I don't think I understand the question correctly. But if it's workflow around the visual workflow, the business rules that I just mentioned, we intend to expose that using a JSON framework. So if that's the question, hopefully that answers the question around.
And I believe that is the question.
Okay. Okay. So then the JSON would be a framework of how you could go customize that. So that will give you a scripting capability outside of the UI capabilities in there.
Very good, very good. And then here's a great question. I know a lot of customers utilize Sprinter. So how is the new gen integrated with the latest version of Sprinter 12.02?
Great. So we haven't yet incorporated Sprinter in here, but you can look at us now obviously having Sprinter as part of our roadmap. The intent again is to have as many tools like Sprinter, like UFT, LeanFT, even some of our next-gen tools like Storm Runner have the ability to move testing assets into next-gen ALM, either as part of source code and give you the traceability in here. So with Sprinter, it'll be an extension of the manual testing capabilities that we provide natively, and we would look for a similar integration like we have with ALM, where you can go save these tests as part of Git in there. But again, that's still in the roadmap, still not there as yet.
Excellent, excellent. And Vandan, this is going to be the last question. So just like a lot of customers use Sprinter, I know that several also utilize BPT. So will this new version have similar functionality as BPT, business process testing?
Yes, so I think that's a very good question in here. So in the past few releases around BPT, you could see the BPT team primarily is focused to go about having a unified experience around creation of the BPT tests itself. And what the teams have been focused on is to take the creation of the components and any BPT related tests within unified functional testing itself. So even with the UFT 12.5 and in the other minor releases that have happened in UFT, the creation of the BPT assets has been is more and more being incorporated into the UFT tool itself. So for us, the BPT integration then changes more of having the BPT tests now moving from the UFT environment or the UFT tool and incorporating that. So it'll be a kind of a similar integration to what we are looking at from Sprinter perspective. It won't be as native as it used to be within the ALM client because of the authoring capabilities now shifting quite heavily within the UFT side.
All right, great, great. Well, Vandan, thank you so much for answering so many questions. Outstanding job. If you wouldn't mind advancing the slides, we're going to wrap things up and let folks get back to their workday. But I know that everybody found this very informative. I would like to thank the audience very much. And just a couple of other items before we let you go for the day. If you haven't already registered for Discover 2016, please be sure to do so. It is just a fantastic customer and partner event. It gives you a chance to explore on how Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is delivering IT solutions for the new style of business. It gives you a great opportunity to network with well over 10,000 attendees, including C-level executives, IT directors, and folks like Vandan and Matt. And it just, even more importantly, it gives you a chance to exchange ideas with your peers. So if you haven't, please try to attend Discover 2016. And then one thing I want to remind everybody, please, as we wrap things up, and Vanden, if you go to the next slide, as we wrap things up, please complete the short survey and opt in for more information from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Again, please be sure to complete the short survey, and just a reminder that the webinar recording and slide deck will be posted to the Vivid website. In the next few days, you will receive an email with those links. Have a great day. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.